Clarissa Davenport laughed across the dining table, her voice dripping with contempt. "I'm done living with a broke man, Daniel. You're nothing but dead weight to me. You're not even a man. A real man provides." Her lover smirked beside her as she shoved divorce papers into Daniel's hands, adding cruelly, "Sign the papers, I'm carrying another man's child, and you'll never be enough. I deserve better than a man with empty pockets." "You're a joke, Daniel. A man with nothing to his name." With those words, she stormed out into her lover's arms, certain she had traded poverty for wealth. What Clarissa didn't know was that the man she mocked, humiliated, and discarded in front of everyone was secretly worth $200 million, and the day she discovered his hidden empire would shatter her pride, her lover, and the very life she thought she had secured. Viewers, have you ever watched someone underestimate you so badly that you swore life itself would prove them wrong? What would you have done in Daniel's place? Imagine the person you loved most laughing in your face, calling you worthless, and walking away, only for them to discover you were worth millions all along. Tell me, would you forgive them when they come crawling back, or would you make them taste the kind of revenge they'll never forget? The rain had just stopped when the family gathered in the Davenport home. The long mahogany dining table gleamed under the chandelier, bowls of steaming jollof rice and roasted chicken spread across it. Laughter filled the air, except at the far end, where Daniel sat in silence, eyes fixed on the rim of his glass. His wife, Clarissa, rose from her chair with a smirk, her voice slicing through the chatter. "Do you know what it feels like," she said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "to carry the weight of a husband who does absolutely nothing? No job, no ambition, no future. I might as well be married to an empty chair." Gasps fluttered around the table. A cousin choked on her drink, an aunt pressed her lips together, fighting a smile. Daniel lifted his eyes slowly, his calm brown gaze steady on his wife. He said nothing. Clarissa wasn't finished. She walked around him, circling like a predator, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Look at him. Sitting there as if silence will pay the bills. People, tell me, what kind of man lets his wife carry the household? A real man provides. Mine just sits and sulks, waiting for miracles." Laughter erupted from one side of the table. Her lover, hidden in plain sight as a business friend, snorted softly, enjoying the spectacle. Daniel's hands tightened around his glass, but his expression remained unshaken. "Clarissa, that's enough," her father muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "No, it's not enough," she snapped back. "I need the world to know. I married a man who pretends to be something he's not. For 3 years I've been patient, waiting for a breakthrough that never comes. But I'm done waiting." Daniel rose slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the table. For a moment, silence blanketed the room, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. His voice, when it came, was low and measured. "Mock me all you want, Clarissa. Just remember, the tables always turn." Her laugh was sharp, almost cruel. "Turn? The only thing turning in this house is the ceiling fan. You're a joke, Daniel. And I'm tired of living as the punchline." With that, she sat back down, triumphant, basking in the stares of relatives who half pitied, half mocked the man she claimed as her husband. Daniel walked out without touching his food. No one noticed the flicker of determination in his eyes as he left the room. They didn't see the calm storm brewing inside him, the storm that would one day swallow all their laughter. But the neighbor across the street, the young woman named Evelyn, did notice when Daniel passed by her window that night, his shoulders heavy, his steps slow. She whispered to herself, "How much can one man take?" She didn't know then that this was only the beginning. The restaurant buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses, a stark contrast to the silence Clarissa left behind at the Davenport table. She sat across from Victor, her so-called business friend, though everyone in her circle knew there was more behind those stolen glances and the way his hand lingered too long on hers. Victor leaned back in his leather seat, his gold watch catching the dim light. He was everything Daniel wasn't: loud, boastful, dripping with charm and the smell of expensive cologne. "So," Victor said, swirling his wine, "you finally told them the truth about your deadweight husband?" Clarissa laughed, the sound brittle, rehearsed. "I humiliated him in front of everyone. Maybe now he'll realize I'm done carrying him. I want a man who can take care of me, Victor. A man like you." Victor's grin widened. He loved the way she clung to him, desperate for validation. To him, Clarissa was a prize, proof he could take what another man failed to value. "Then leave him," he said smoothly. "You deserve better. File for divorce, move in with me. Let's give you the life you've been craving. Designer clothes, trips to Dubai, a house with your name etched on the gate." Clarissa's heart pounded. The picture he painted was everything she thought she wanted. A glamorous escape. No more shame of introducing a jobless husband at parties, no more whispers from her friends. "But what if Daniel fights it?" she asked, her voice softening for the first time. Victor chuckled. "What's there to fight for? He's got nothing. No money, no influence, no future. Trust me, Clarissa, he'll sign whatever papers you push under his nose. And if he doesn't, we'll bury him with lawyers. He can't afford a defense." Her lips curved into a smile. The plan was forming clearly in her mind now. She would file for divorce, walk out with her dignity, or so she thought, and step into a new life with Victor. But beneath the table, as she pressed her hand against her belly, a wave of nausea swept through her. She had been late for weeks now, though she hadn't dared to speak it aloud. A child. Victor's child. She leaned back, letting the reality settle in. Maybe this was the final push she needed to cut ties with Daniel. If she told Victor about the baby, he'd be bound to her forever. "Clarissa," Victor's voice pulled her back, "picture it, no more dinners in cramped family houses. Just you, me, and the life you deserve. Trust me, Daniel won't even know what hit him." Clarissa clinked her glass against his, sealing her decision with a sip of red wine. "To freedom," she whispered. Neither of them noticed the young waiter who paused too long at their table, catching every word. The city had a way of carrying secrets, and this one was already on its way back to Daniel. The papers landed on the dining table with a thud that echoed through the quiet house. Daniel looked down at them, his brow furrowing as he recognized the bold heading, "Petition for Divorce." Clarissa stood across from him, arms folded, her face painted with cold determination. "Sign them," she said flatly. Daniel didn't move. He traced the edge of the paper with his finger, then lifted his eyes to hers. "So this is what you've chosen?" "What choice do I have?" she shot back. "I can't keep pretending to be married to a man who has nothing to offer me. I need security, Daniel. I need a man who can provide." His lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement but of resignation. "And you think Victor will give you that security?" Her eyes flickered for a moment, but pride kept her upright. "Victor is already giving me what you never could, a future. He believes in me, he supports me. And soon." She hesitated, her hand brushing across her stomach almost unconsciously. "Soon there will be more reason for us to be together." Daniel's gaze followed the motion, and the truth dawned on him like a blade piercing through flesh. "You're pregnant," he whispered. Clarissa straightened, chin high. "Yes. And it's not yours. So you see, Daniel, there's no reason for me to stay. Sign the papers. End this farce." For the first time in years, Daniel laughed, a deep, bitter laugh that startled her. "You mock me for being jobless, you humiliate me in front of everyone, and now you parade another man's child as your ticket out of this marriage." He leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Do you think this story ends the way you want it to, Clarissa?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't care how it ends for you. All I know is I'm done. Sign the papers." Daniel picked up the pen slowly, twirling it between his fingers. Then, without another word, he scrawled his name across the dotted line. He pushed the papers back to her, his eyes unreadable. You wanted your freedom. Now you have it. Clarissa exhaled, relief flooding her face. She gathered the documents quickly, as though afraid he might change his mind. Good. You'll see, Daniel. You'll regret not being the man I needed. He didn't answer. He only watched her walk out of the house, suitcase in hand, her perfume lingering in the doorway long after she was gone. When the door shut, the silence pressed down like a weight on his chest. He sank into the chair, the reality of betrayal cutting deeper than any words she had thrown at him. For a moment, he let himself feel the ache, the loss of a woman he once loved, the mockery of a marriage shattered. But across the street, Evelyn saw the shadow of his figure through the window, shoulders slumped in defeat. Something in her heart stirred, a quiet resolve that she wouldn't let him face this storm alone. The days after Clarissa's departure blurred together for Daniel. The once lively house now echoed with silence, its walls heavy with memories that mocked him more than his wife's words ever could. He barely ate, barely slept. He wandered the rooms at night like a ghost, staring at the empty chair where Clarissa used to sit. One evening, exhaustion finally caught up with him. His chest tightened as he tried to climb the stairs. His vision swam, his knees buckled, and he collapsed near the hallway table. Across the street, Evelyn was watering her flowers when she noticed Daniel's front door ajar. Something in her heart jolted. She rushed over, pushed the door open, and gasped at the sight of him lying unconscious on the floor. "Daniel," she cried, kneeling beside him. She shook him gently, her voice trembling. "Daniel, wake up." His eyes fluttered open, dazed and weak. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though his body said otherwise. "No, you're not fine," Evelyn whispered. With surprising strength, she helped him sit upright, supporting him with her shoulder. "You need rest. You can't keep living like this." He leaned against the wall, shame flickering across his tired eyes. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "I noticed," Evelyn said softly. "I see you, Daniel. You're not as invisible as you think." Her words broke through the numbness he had been carrying. For weeks, he had lived under the crushing weight of betrayal, but here was someone who looked at him not with pity, not with judgment, but with simple compassion. She brought him to her home that night, insisting he not argue. She brewed him ginger tea, pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, and made him lie down on her sofa. Daniel resisted at first, but fatigue melted his pride. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice raspy. Evelyn's eyes held his with quiet conviction. "Because everyone deserves kindness. Even when the world forgets them." He turned his face toward the ceiling, blinking back emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel. In that moment, Evelyn wasn't just a neighbor, she was a light cutting through the darkness. Over the following days, she checked on him often. She left warm meals at his door, tidied his front porch, and reminded him to take walks in the garden. She never asked about Clarissa, never pressed him to share more than he wanted. Instead, she gave him the one thing he had been denied, dignity without conditions. One morning, Daniel found a small note tucked under the bowl she left. "Storms don't last forever. Neither does heartbreak. E." He held the note for a long time, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time since Clarissa left, he felt a flicker of hope, an ember that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. Weeks passed, and Daniel regained his strength under Evelyn's quiet care. The ache in his chest remained, but beneath it stirred something Clarissa never saw in him, a quiet determination. On a cloudy Tuesday morning, he dressed in a crisp navy suit that had been gathering dust in his wardrobe. He adjusted the cuffs, slipped on a watch most people would mistake for a simple timepiece, and left his house without a word. Evelyn, watching from her porch, tilted her head in curiosity. She had grown used to seeing him in plain shirts and worn shoes. This was different. There was a sharpness in his step, a hidden authority in the way he carried himself. Daniel drove past the small shops and crowded streets until he reached the towering glass building downtown. The security guard at the gate straightened instantly, bowing his head. "Good morning, sir," the guard said respectfully as he opened the gate. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the overhead lights. Executives in tailored suits hurried to line up, murmuring greetings as he passed. Secretaries whispered in awe, glancing at each other as though they were seeing a legend in motion. The elevator doors slid open, and Daniel stepped into the penthouse office, his office. On the wall hung a framed article from a business magazine, "The enigmatic investor behind $200 million empire, the man who stays in the shadows." His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Sandra, handed him a stack of files. "Morning, Mr. Davenport. The board has been waiting. Shall I bring them in?" Daniel nodded. "Let's get started." As the board members filed into the room, one of them, a graying man with years of experience, leaned toward another and whispered, "Hard to believe his wife thinks he's broke. If only she knew." Daniel heard, but he didn't flinch. He opened the meeting with calm authority, discussing mergers, investments, and international expansions. Every word he spoke carried the weight of a man who wasn't just wealthy, he was brilliant. For years, he had deliberately kept his fortune hidden behind shell companies and silent partnerships. He wanted a wife who loved him for him, not his wealth. But Clarissa's betrayal had proved what he feared all along: she was blinded by appearances. When the meeting ended, Daniel stood by the wide glass window overlooking the city. Cars crawled like ants below, the skyline cutting sharp against the horizon. His reflection in the glass showed not a broken man, but a billionaire in command of his destiny. And for the first time since the divorce papers, he whispered to himself, "Patience pays. They'll all see." That evening, Evelyn knocked on his door with a casserole. She noticed the faint scent of expensive cologne clinging to him, the way his shoulders seemed taller, steadier. "You look different today," she said, curious. Daniel gave her a small smile, one corner of his lips curling upward. "Maybe I remembered who I really am." Evelyn didn't understand fully, but she knew one thing: Daniel was no ordinary man. Clarissa thought life with Victor would be her escape. The first weeks felt intoxicating: lavish dinners, expensive gifts, nights filled with champagne and whispered promises. She paraded him on her arm like a trophy, convinced she had upgraded from Daniel's so-called failure. But as her belly began to swell with pregnancy, reality sharpened its claws. "Victor, we need to start thinking about the baby," Clarissa said one evening, resting a protective hand over her stomach. They were in his sleek condo, city lights pouring in through the glass walls. Victor barely looked up from his phone. "A baby wasn't part of my plan," he muttered. Her brows knitted. "Not part of your plan? Victor, this is your child." He sighed, tossing the phone aside. Yeah. But you're not exactly the woman I thought I was getting. You've gotten demanding. Moody. Always talking about the future. Where's the fun girl who used to sneak around with me? Now you just nag." Clarissa's chest tightened. "I left my husband for you. I gave you everything. And you promised." Victor cut her off with a cold laugh. "I promised you excitement, Clarissa. Not to play house with a pregnant woman." The words stung like a slap. She had traded loyalty for lust, stability for empty thrills. And now, the cracks in Victor's facade widened. A week later, Clarissa walked into the condo early from a doctor's appointment and froze. A woman in a red silk robe strolled out of Victor's bedroom, her lips swollen from kisses that Clarissa knew too well. "Who is she?" Clarissa demanded, her voice trembling. Victor leaned lazily against the counter, utterly unashamed. "This is Nadia," he said smoothly. "She's been keeping me company. She knows how to have fun, unlike you." Clarissa's hands shook. I'm carrying your child, Victor. And you dare. Nadia smirked, sliding her arm possessively around his waist. Oh, please. Don't act like you didn't trap him. Men like Victor don't settle for women who nag and cry. You're yesterday's news, sweetheart. Before Clarissa could respond, Victor's expression hardened. Pack your things. You can stay at some cheap motel if you want. This is my place, and Nadia isn't going anywhere. Tears blurred Clarissa's vision. She clutched her stomach as if shielding her unborn child from the cruelty unfolding before her. You can't do this to me. Not now. But he already had. Within an hour, Clarissa found herself on the sidewalk, a suitcase at her feet, rain beginning to drizzle over her trembling frame. She looked up at the towering building, its windows glowing warm with the life that had been stolen from her, and for the first time, regret sank its claws deep into her heart. She whispered into the night, "What have I done?" The city didn't answer. Only the sound of car horns and the splash of tires through puddles kept her company. Alone, pregnant, and betrayed by the man she thought would save her, Clarissa realized she had traded gold for dust. The morning sun bounced off the glass towers of the city, but none shone brighter than the headlines plastered across every newspaper stand and digital screen. Mystery investor behind $200 million empire finally revealed, Daniel Davenport steps into the light. Photographs of Daniel in a tailored navy suit, his jaw sharp and eyes steady, dominated the front pages. Cameras had captured him striding out of the marble lobby of his corporate headquarters, board members trailing behind like shadows. No longer the jobless husband mocked in whispers, he now stood as one of the most powerful men in the state. At the grocery store, at the barber's shop, in bustling cafes, people spoke his name with awe. Daniel Davenport? That quiet man who used to live down the street? No way. I heard he owns 3 tech firms, 2 shipping companies, and a chain of hotels. Imagine his wife leaving him right before all this came out. The gossip spread like wildfire. Clarissa, dragging her suitcase through the cracked pavement on her way to a friend's place, caught sight of a billboard flashing Daniel's face. Her steps faltered. The headline cut her deeper than any insult. From silent man to billionaire boss. Her throat tightened. The phone nearly slipped from her hand as she scrolled through articles, each one confirming the same devastating truth. The man she mocked, the man she humiliated and discarded, was not only successful, he was untouchable. No, this can't be real, she whispered, her voice cracking. Tears welled as her knees buckled under the weight of regret. She had left Daniel believing he had nothing, only to discover he had everything. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn stood at her window, holding a copy of the newspaper. Her lips curved into a soft smile as she read, pride warming her chest. She had always sensed there was more to Daniel than he revealed. Now the world saw it too. That evening, Daniel returned to his neighborhood, his sleek black car gliding to a stop in front of his home. Neighbors peeked through curtains, their whispers trailing behind him. Look at him, who would have thought? His wife must be eating her heart out now. Daniel ignored the murmurs. He stepped out with quiet grace, his presence radiating strength. Evelyn waved from across the street, holding a casserole dish, her smile genuine, not the forced admiration of those who had once mocked him, but the steady kindness of someone who believed in him before the truth came out. For the first time in months, Daniel's heart felt lighter. He knew Clarissa would come crawling back, begging, scheming, but he also knew he would never be the same man she mocked. He was no longer the broken husband. He was the billionaire who had learned the true cost of loyalty and betrayal. Standing on his porch, Daniel whispered to himself, now the tables turn. And across town, Clarissa, soaked in regret and clutching her swollen belly, realized those words had never rung truer. The neighborhood buzzed for weeks after Daniel's rise was revealed. Cars slowed when they passed his house, neighbors lingered outside pretending to water plants, all hoping for a glimpse of the billionaire next door. But Daniel paid them no mind. The only person he welcomed freely was Evelyn. One evening, she arrived with a basket of freshly baked bread, her hair tied back loosely, her face glowing with the kind of warmth no amount of money could buy. "You've been skipping meals again," she teased gently, placing the basket on his table. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "And here I thought I was intimidating now." "Intimidating?" Evelyn laughed. "Daniel, you're the same man who nearly fainted in his hallway a few weeks ago. Billionaire or not, you still need to eat." Her laughter filled the room with a comfort he hadn't felt in years. They sat together, sharing bread and tea, talking about simple things, the weather, her flowers, the stray cat that liked to nap on her porch. And for the first time, Daniel realized he didn't miss the luxury Clarissa had once demanded. He missed this, companionship without judgment, kindness without strings. Across the city, Clarissa was unraveling. She had tried calling Daniel, but he never picked up. She even showed up at his office one afternoon, but the receptionist, polite but firm, turned her away. She watched through the glass doors as Daniel walked past in his tailored suit, surrounded by business partners. He didn't glance her way. Finally, she swallowed her pride and returned to his house. Her heavy belly made each step harder as she stood on his porch, tears threatening to spill. When Daniel opened the door, his expression was unreadable. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Please, let me come home. For the baby's sake, if nothing else." Daniel studied her, the woman who had once mocked him into silence, the woman who left him when he was most vulnerable. He thought of Evelyn, the neighbor who had nursed him without asking for anything in return. His choice was clear. "You left home the day you chose him over me," Daniel said softly, but firmly. "And that door will never open to you again." Clarissa's tears spilled freely now. "Please, Daniel. I have nowhere else to go. Victor doesn't want me, his mistress threw me out." "Then go to them," he interrupted, his voice like steel. "That's the life you chose. Live it." The door closed gently, not slammed, but with finality. Clarissa stood frozen on the porch, sobs racking her body, while Evelyn, watching quietly from across the street, felt a pang of pity, but also pride. Daniel had finally reclaimed his dignity. Inside, Daniel leaned against the door, exhaling deeply. For the first time, he wasn't weighed down by Clarissa's betrayal. He turned and found Evelyn's silhouette in her window. Their eyes met across the street, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. The past was closed. The future, though uncertain, was brighter than ever. Daniel had stayed silent long enough. Clarissa's betrayal had scarred him, yes, but it had also sharpened him. Now that the world knew who he was, it was time to settle the score with the man who thought he had stolen everything from him. Victor. Daniel began quietly, pulling strings through lawyers and investigators. Within weeks, he had uncovered everything: Victor's shady business deals, unpaid debts, and the mistress he flaunted so carelessly. Documents piled high in Daniel's office, each one a nail for the coffin he was building. One evening, Victor hosted a lavish party in his penthouse, eager to impress new investors. Champagne flowed, laughter filled the air, and Nadia clung to his arm in her crimson gown. But the music died when the doors burst open and federal officers strode in. Victor Cole, the lead agent, announced, "You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion." Gasps erupted. Cameras flashed. Victor's face drained of color as he stammered, "This is a mistake, my lawyers." But the evidence Daniel's team had delivered to the authorities was airtight. Victor was dragged out in handcuffs, his investors scattering like frightened birds. Nadia stood frozen, her eyes wide, realizing the empire she thought she'd inherited was nothing but sand. As Victor was shoved into the waiting car outside, a sleek black limousine pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped Daniel, calm, composed, radiating power. "Daniel," Victor spat, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. You did this. Daniel's gaze was steady, his words measured. No, Victor. You did this to yourself. Greed always devours its master. The crowd whispered in awe as the jobless husband faced the man who had stolen his wife and destroyed his marriage. For once, Daniel didn't feel anger, only justice. Meanwhile, Clarissa stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching her belly, watching the scene unfold. Her heart pounded as she realized the full weight of her choices. Victor was ruined, his mistress vanished into the night, and she, pregnant and abandoned, had nothing. Daniel's revenge hadn't just been against Victor. It was against Clarissa, too. Every headline that praised him as the billionaire genius was a reminder of what she had thrown away. Every whisper of his power was another lash of regret across her soul. Later that week, a notice arrived at Clarissa's temporary apartment, an eviction order. She discovered the lease had been tied to Victor's business accounts, now frozen by the government. She packed what little she had left, dragging her suitcase into the street. Neighbors who once envied her now pitied her, murmuring as she passed. Back at his home, Daniel watched from his study window as Evelyn arranged flowers on her porch. He thought of how she had lifted him when he was at his lowest, while Clarissa had trampled him deeper into despair. The past had been avenged. The present was secure. And the future? The future held something Clarissa could never take away again. The church bells tolled softly in the crisp morning air, echoing across the town square. People gathered in their best clothes, smiles bright, whispers carrying the same name, Daniel Davenport. But this time, it wasn't about his fortune or his revenge, it was about his wedding. At the altar stood Daniel, dressed in a tailored black suit, his expression calm but his eyes shining with something deeper than wealth could ever buy, peace. Beside him, radiant in a simple ivory gown, was Evelyn. She carried no diamonds, no glittering jewels, yet she glowed brighter than any of them. Her hand slipped into Daniel's, steady and warm, the way it had been since the night she found him collapsed and broken. The vows were exchanged quietly, but every word was soaked with meaning. I promise to stand with you, not for what you have, Evelyn whispered, but for who you are. Daniel's voice trembled, the first time his composure cracked in years. And I promise to honor you, Evelyn, because you saw me when I was invisible. Applause filled the church as the couple sealed their vows with a kiss. Outside, a black limousine waited, its polished surface reflecting the joy of a man who had finally found true love. But at the far end of the square, a figure lingered in the shadows. Clarissa stood with her arms wrapped around her swollen belly, her once perfect hair unkempt, her dress creased from nights of wandering. She watched the celebration from a distance, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had dreamed once of being the woman in white, standing beside Daniel as the world applauded. Instead, she was an outcast, a warning etched into living flesh. When Daniel and Evelyn emerged from the church, the crowd cheered. For a brief moment, Daniel's eyes caught Clarissa's across the street. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but he only gave her a single look, a look not of hatred, but of finality. The door was closed forever. Clarissa's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the steps, sobbing into her hands as the limousine rolled away, carrying the man she had mocked into a future she could never touch. Inside the car, Evelyn leaned against Daniel's shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. Daniel looked out the window at the passing streets, the same streets where he had once walked broken, mocked, and discarded. Now, with Evelyn's hand resting in his, he smiled. For the first time in a long time, he said, "I am." As the car disappeared into the horizon, the moral of their story lingered like the tolling of the bells. Greed blinds, arrogance destroys, but compassion and loyalty build a love that outlasts fortune.